You know, normally I'm not one for unboxings, but even I can make exceptions. Looking to build or upgrade your gaming PC? The new lineup of Aries memory from Lexar is the easiest decision you'll ever make. Its sleek design will match perfectly with any build, and with on-die error correction, your overclocks won't leave you bleeding. Aries not only delivers speed, but it rams its way through your computing memory needs without locking horns. Rhett, what is with all these puns?
Aries means ram, Jeff. It's Latin.
Get your RAM on with Lexar's Aries DDR4 or DDR5 memory kits by following the link down in the video description. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and like I mentioned, I have a very special unboxing for today's video. This is a PC that I have been hunting after for probably the better part of 5 years since it was announced. This is the Intel Hades Canyon NUC, and it's got a couple surprises inside. If you're not familiar with the Intel NUC line of computers, I do wonder what rock you've been living under. Now, NUC stands for the Next Unit of Computing, and it's kind of Intel's vision for the future of small form factor desktops. Now this right here is the Intel Hades Canyon NUC, and it is more of a gaming-centric NUC in Intel's lineup. It features an 8th generation Intel Core i7-8809G, which is a very special CPU as it features on-package Radeon Vega RX graphics. Yeah, I said on-package. This chip was a collaboration between AMD and Intel. So why am I bothering unboxing a 4.5-year-old desktop? Well, this one hasn't been unboxed before. That's right, it is brand new in box, and we're gonna peel it. So inside this awesome looking box with the Intel's Hades Canyon skull is obviously the NUC itself. And if we dig down here underneath, we'll find the not insubstantial power brick. Like we got our power cord. And a couple of assorted manuals. Our VESA mount plate for mounting this onto the back of a monitor. And a flyer for Intel Optane M.2 drives. And that's about it. Now, the Hades Canyon NUC debuted all the way back in Q1 of 2018, making it around 4.5 years old at this point. It was available in 2 different models at launch, one at $799 aimed at content creators, and this one that I have here, the higher end model, aimed as a standalone VR rig, and it cost $999 bare bone. And I think with the introductions out of the way, let's go ahead and get this show on the road.
That was appealing.
So even though the system is fairly small, it is incredibly dense. This probably weighs in at about 2.5 pounds, if not a little more. It has almost an Alienware aesthetic to it, with the bottom feet on this having really sharp angles and kind of an otherworldly design. One of the cool things about this NUC is, even though it is a very small form factor, it is not lacking for I/O. Around the rear, we've got our 19-volt laptop power input, a pair of Thunderbolt ports, a pair of mini display ports, a pair of gigabit Ethernet ports, 4 USB 3.0s, and an HDMI 2.0. Moving around to the front of the unit, we've got our power button, hard drive activity light, a full-size SD card, USB 3.0 port, and a high-power USB 3.0 port, another full-size HDMI 2.0, a USB Type-C, and a headphone and microphone jack. Now, as this is a bare bones kit, you are expected to bring your own hardware to it. That is an M.2 SSD, as well as some DDR4 SODIMM memory. However, this one came fully assembled with everything inside of it. But we're gonna go ahead and take it apart anyway, and just see what we're working with. This is stupid. But we're gonna take it apart anyway, and see what we're working with. All right, so one screw in this giant heat shield right here, and the whole thing lifts off, revealing 2 M.2 slots as well as a pair of DDR4 SODIMM slots. And installed in our unit, we have a Samsung 970 EVO Plus 256 gigabyte SSD and what appears to be 16 gigabytes of Kingston value RAM running at 2400 megahertz. Now, both of these systems, both the 799 and the 999, came with the same Intel i7-8809G, but what made the 999 one a little bit different was it is overclockable, including the memory. So one thing I planned on doing was swapping out the 2400 megahertz sticks with a pair of 3200 megahertz sticks to see if we can really take advantage of those onboard graphics. Out goes the Kingston Value RAM, and in goes the G-Skill Ripjaws. One reason you can tell this system is a little bit dated is the onboard Wi-Fi. It is an Intel 825 NGW. That's right, we're not even rocking AC, this is Wi-Fi N. Might be something else I swap out in the near future. All right, with that little upgrade complete, we're actually gonna tear this thing completely down, as considering this system is 4.5 years old and has never been used, I kind of want to repaste it before I even boot it up, because I'm sure that thermal paste is dry AF. Not that Intel is known for their fantastic thermal paste jobs. All right, we got it figured out. So first off, this little plastic bezel comes off, and make sure you remove the microphone cable from that. And then you just kind of bend outward on the metal casing, and the whole unit pops right up. And you can see where a lot of the weight in this thing comes from, as this is the heatsink for cooling the 8809G. There's also two of the biggest blowers I have ever seen in my life inside of this thing. Those are some rather impressive fans. But next up, we're gonna go ahead and remove the heatsink and replace the thermal paste on here. About just 4 screws and that bracket pops right off. And in theory, there we go. And there is what makes this system so incredibly special. I am definitely glad I decided to take this apart because, yeah, that thermal paste you could say is a little bit dry as it curls up and stands on its own. One thing I will say, bravo Intel for using just a giant frickin' hunk of copper for the base plate on this. No need to use heat pipes when all you have is copper, huh? And now we come to the main attraction, which is the Intel 8809G itself. Now, like I said, this is a very unique package put together by both Intel and AMD. First and foremost, we have the Intel i7-8809 itself, which is a 4-core, 8-threaded mobile CPU with a 3.1 GHz base clock and 4.2 GHz max turbo based on Intel Kaby Lake. Now, what makes this interesting is it is a fully unlocked CPU, meaning you can overclock it to your heart's content. And then towards the other side of the chip is our on-package Radeon RX Vega M GH GPU with a dedicated 4 GB of HBM. That's right, this is not shared memory with the CPU, this is its own 4 GB of extremely high bandwidth memory. So what thermal paste am I using for this? Well, I figured we would kick it old school with a little Arctic Silver 5. We get a little bit more of a permanent bond, so I don't ever have to take this thing apart again.
You gonna want me to cut this part out, Jeff?
Probably. Actually, no. With Arctic Silver 5, the proper way to apply it is to pre-spread it before you put it onto the heatsink. So there is only one right way to do this. I like Silver 5 because it is halfway between a thermal epoxy and actual thermal paste that we use today. Like I said, very old school. You want to spread it in one fairly uniform but not terribly thin layer. And then I'm actually going to add just a little bit of a dab to each side of this heatsink just to give it a touch more material to spread out. And I think with that, we are ready to put this whole thing back together. Put it on backwards. Of course I did. There we go. What's really interesting about this particular chip from AMD is this launched at the exact same time that AMD's own APUs based on Ryzen launched. So the 2200G and the 2400G, those were also Q1 2018. However, we never got the Vega 24 or any variant larger than the Vega 11 with AMD's own APUs. So their collaboration with Intel was actually the fastest variant of Vega Mobile that you could get your hands on. All right, and now for the fun part of putting this all back together. Overall, I gotta say, I am pretty impressed with the construction of this thing. Very neat and tidy, very, very dense, but also fairly easy to work on. And there's that, and all without any extra screws. Now, let's go ahead and get this thing fired up and see what the best small form factor gaming PC of 2018 had to offer. All right, not that much later, and we have this thing fired up, complete with its awesome RGB skull logo on top. And let's go ahead and take a look at some of the performance settings, starting with an overall view of where this would have landed performance-wise back in 2018. Here I've got some results from 3D Mark Firestrike, and you can see the RX Vega M graphics card scored an 8638 overall, paired with that i7-8809G. Now, the two closest scores that I could find to that were using a Ryzen 5 2600 and either a GTX 1650 or a Radeon RX 470 for a graphics card. Now, the really interesting thing to keep in mind here is we are using a mobile Vega variant that is sharing the package with the i7-8809G, and this is a graphics card that never saw any other release on another platform, whether it be for a desktop graphics card or for AMD's own APUs. And as you can see right down here, as far as graphics score goes, the Vega graphics card actually beat out both the 1650 and the RX 470. So this is going to put it right on par with, say, a GTX 1060 or an RX 470 or RX 570 as far as overall graphics performance goes. That is an extremely impressive result, given this is a very, very small form factor. As far as games go, we're going to run through just a couple of titles here, starting with Hitman 3 running at 1080p and high settings. So let's go ahead and hit play and see how this performs. So here we are in game, and in the top right corner you'll see all the relevant stats and specs that you're going to want to keep an eye on. First and foremost, you can see our CPU is overclocking itself all the way up to that 4 to 4.1 gigahertz mark, so pretty good performance right out of the gate here. The game itself seems to be sitting right around 55 frames per second in this pretty expansive outdoor area with a lot of reflections going on. This is one of my favorite areas to benchmark this game at. Early results for temperature are also looking fantastic with that new thermal paste. CPU is sitting right around 80 to 82 degrees Celsius, and the GPU thermal diode is reading right around 70 degrees, both of which are fantastic results when you have to consider that this CPU has a thermal limit of 100 degrees Celsius. So sitting 15 degrees below that, I will definitely take that result. The fans are also reasonably well controlled, giving us those temps. They're sitting right around 17 to 1800 RPM, and I can hear them, but I really have to focus to do so. Now right here, if you take a look at GPU memory utilization, you can see we're sitting right at 4 gigabytes. Now, that is the limit of this graphics card, so modern games may struggle with some higher textures and higher settings. But keep in mind the graphics card that this came in equating to, that being either a GTX 1060 or an RX 470 or RX 570, those are available with either 3 or 6 gigabytes as far as the 1060 or 4 to 8 gigabytes for the RX 470. So honestly, you're going to have those same limitations with those desktop variant graphics cards anyway. Here indoors, we're sitting just above 60 frames per second, peaking at about 65, but overall, this is a very, very good experience and looks absolutely fantastic with no stuttering to speak of. I would say this is a great showing for this first title. Time to make this thing sweat just a little bit. Let's fire up Elden Ring and see how it's able to handle that. All right, here we are inside Elden Ring, and the first thing I'm going to do is head on over to our performance settings. I've gone ahead and set the quality setting at the medium preset, and I do kind of want to see what that entails. First off, I am going to disable motion blur, because no game should have motion blur. And pretty much everything else is at medium. Water surface quality is at high. I'm going to drop that down to low because that is one of the things that can typically majorly impact a game's performance, and I want to give this the best shot of looking as great as it can, plus being somewhat smooth. So, I think that should do it. Let's go ahead and load up my game. All All right, here we are in the opening field of the game, and sitting right around 40 frames per second with a pretty good windstorm going on, and a couple different enemies visible right here in the foreground. So right off the bat, I'm going to call this very playable. Tilting the camera down just slightly, and we jump all the way up to about 55 frames per second. This seems like a game that's going to vary pretty wildly depending on what environment you're in. As you can see, as I look out a little bit further in the distance, we're sitting right about 35 to 40 frames per second. But I'm not seeing it drop really anywhere below that. Let's head on over to this cave and see if the frame rate jumps up by any noticeable amount. Yeah, as soon as we get inside this cave, we're sitting right at 60 frames per second, and it seems to be pretty well locked there. So in some open areas, you are going to run into a graphics limitation, especially with GPU memory. As you can see, we are sitting at 4.3 gigabytes used, which means we are using some virtual swap space. But definitely playable with some minor and limited slowdowns in the open terrain. And I died. Because of course I did. Jumped down into a pack of wolves. Killed one of them and the other three ripped me apart. I'm only level 5, give me a break. So the fans are sitting slightly higher in this game, sitting right around 2000, trending to 2100 RPM at times, and our CPU sitting at 86 degrees. The system is definitely audible, but it's not by any means noticeable or uncomfortable or annoying. It's a very quiet, breathy fan sound instead of a high-pitched whine like a lot of NUCs or laptops that you might be used to. And again, GPU temps are definitely in check at 71 degrees on the thermal diode and 69 degrees for that HBM. Nice. Last but not least, you know we gotta try Cyberpunk, which is the Dark Souls of computer benchmarks. I love that even in the menu, we're sitting at 3 gigabytes of video memory used. Just because I know better, we're going to use the low preset and medium texture quality on this. Other than that, I think I'm going to leave everything pretty much alone. You know, let's go ahead and turn on a couple little additives. So we'll go low presets, but I am going to turn on depth of field and lens flare just to give it that little bit of pop. One thing about this system, it loads games very, very quickly. Like, surprisingly fast. All right, we are out in the open road. 42, 43 frames per second. I mean, there's not a lot going on, but remember, we're at 1080p. This is not performing all that bad. Surprisingly enough, GPU memory usage, only 3.8 gigabytes. So less than the other two games. Of course, we are at low settings and medium texture detail. Yeah, fans again, very well controlled, sitting right around 1900 RPM. CPU core sitting at 81 degrees, GPU core at 67. HBM on this one is only 64 degrees, so for some reason Cyberpunk isn't stressing this quite as much as the other two games. And it's still fully playable, sitting at honestly, between 35 and 40 FPS. Oh, those cops have little skulls over their heads. Whew, they killed me pretty quick. And we dropped down to about 29 FPS at bottom. But, playable? Cyberpunk, playable? On a 4.5-year-old mobile system? This is seriously impressive. So that is a very brief look at the Intel Hades Canyon NUC with the i7-8809G and the Vega RX graphics on board. Definitely a unique piece of computing history and one that has been on my wish list for quite a few years. Definitely glad that I got a chance to take a look at this, and honestly, for what I paid for it, it may not be a bad option for a dedicated gaming PC here in 2022. I picked this up with the 250 gig SSD and 16 gigabytes of memory for just $500 shipped. Now, this was what appears to be a new old stock unit that a reseller got a hold of, added some memory and an SSD to it, and then shipped it out as a new product, as this did ship to me with Windows 11 installed. But make no doubt about it, this was not a used PC when I got it. For a system with an 8th generation Kaby Lake i7, 4 cores, 8 threads, 4.1 GHz turbo, and GTX 1060-like performance with HBM memory on board, I would say $500 is a pretty fair asking price, especially given the small form factor. Now, if you can find one of these at $500, I would definitely jump on it, but I feel like these deals are going to be ones that you have to be in the right place at the right time to be able to snag one. So what's next for this little guy? Well, I was planning on building myself a home theater PC using a Gigabyte bricks and a Ryzen embedded CPU that I have on hand already. But given the fantastic performance that I saw here, I think I might install SteamOS and give this a shot instead. Let me know if that's a video you guys would be interested in seeing. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing for daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is also down in the video description. That's going to do it for me in this one, guys. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, everyone. There's a reason to do sponsored videos. Today's drink is Jameson 18 Year, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't steal a little bit of this beforehand. We'll just do one finger. Still 10 in the morning.